Well, we have made it. It is our last day of exploration. Tomorrow is our day just to basically drive straight through to home. There won't be time to see a whole lot tomorrow. We have to get home and get a bunch of stuff done before we get ready to go to work the next day. But we're going to enjoy today as much as we possibly can. It's cloud-free, a light breeze, but the sun is shining and it's nice and warm. So some of the best weather we've had on the trip, and we're starting our day here at the Bassant Campground just outside of Mortlach, Saskatchewan, before we head to the first annual swap meet at the Sukanen Ship and Pioneer Village Museum. So let's go. The campground actually filled in quite a bit last night with a lot of one-time or one-night campers. So all these sites that you're seeing here were occupied last night. All those people have since pulled out and back on the road, license plates from Ontario and Manitoba, and so we kind of have this area to ourselves once again. And I'm not sure if it'll come through on camera once I stop talking, but it's really peaceful and quiet here this morning. Just a little breeze and some birds. This is certainly not the nicest spot in the campground. I mean, there's nothing really wrong with it. It's just kind of laid out weird with a few weird things, such as you have our site here, and then basically right next to our picnic table, which on its own sits super crooked and uneven and rocks around a lot. Right next to our picnic table is the public water tap. So anyone who wants to fill a jug or anything basically has to come right into our site to do it. Then right next to that, we have the public washroom. But the really strange thing is this. When you go hunting for our fire pit, you have to come way back over here to the pit here. So our fire pit is practically further from our campsite than the public water tap and the public washroom. So a little bit of a strange layout, but I still love the fact that the campground has really nice trees, lots of birds, train tracks nearby, which for us is a nice bonus because we like listening to the trains come through even though we can't see them from our spot. And it's a wonderful throwback campground. There's a lot more full-timer seasonal sites here than I remember from before. I don't know if they're kind of changing their focus or not, but that can change the vibe of a campground a little bit. So I hope Bassant doesn't lose what it's always had and what has kept me coming back here over the last, this is like my 5th time here in the last 9 years. Mabel seems to like it. She's just kind of relaxing here in the shade before we get ready to head out to the museum and the flea market / swap meet. So that's gonna be our next stop. All right, gang. Well, it is me, DanOCan, here underneath this incognito disguise. Not really a disguise, but the sun is beating down here, so I'm taking steps to keep myself from turning into a giant red lobster by the end of the day, which tends to happen when you're a bit fair-skinned. Damn these European genes. Anywho, yeah, we are on the grounds of the Sukanen Ship and Pioneer Village Museum, and we'll talk a bit more about the ship part of things later. But for now, it's really we'll kind of focus on the Pioneer Village and Museum part. And if you look around behind me there, you can see the old Mawer elevator that was moved onto the site here and dedicated in 2013. I think that was actually my first trip to this museum. We've been here numerous times since then. Never really done a video from this location yet, but this is truly one of our favorite museums of all time. The group of people they have working here and the membership and the things that they do at this museum are absolutely incredible. And I think you're gonna really enjoy taking a tour with us as we look around and see all the things that take place here at the Souk. Inside the old Mawer grain elevator here at the Sukanen, and we'll never be able to come in here without thinking of our dear friend Jim Pearson. Jim died several years ago, but was probably the foremost expert on prairie grain elevators in, out of anybody. He knew more than anybody about their history and was dedicated to going around and documenting them. And every year at the annual threshing bee in September, Jim would be set up in here with his tables of cardstock grain elevators and his Vanishing Sentinels book, and selling them to people, talking to people about elevators in general. And it's hard to come in here and not think of Jim and feel his presence and what a loss it was to the grain elevator community when Jim passed away. And we still miss you, buddy. I don't know. Yeah. Inside the elevator agent's office and looking at the Fairbanks Morse engine. This is a 1-cylinder, 10 horsepower, 350 RPM engine. And there's the belt that it would have used to turn the crank that would have eventually operated the leg inside the elevator and moved the grain. In the elevator agent's office, this was where a lot of business took place in every small town across the prairies. This was the heart of many communities. And you see the telephone there. Often the grain elevator would be the first place in town to actually have a working telephone. So it's hard to overstate how important grain elevators were to the small prairie communities back in the day. Sad to see so many disappearing. Good that this one here from Mawer is still being looked after and cared for here at the Sukanen. It's always fun to kind of wander around the back areas of the museum, the back side of buildings, the areas where there's less things going on, just to kind of check out and see what we can see, the stuff that the general public that's not interested and is just looking at the main area, the stuff that they miss. Such a collection of dry goods. This is one of my favorite buildings at the entire museum. This and the small appliances building. Just the collection of material in here. The cans, the boxes. So incredible. Classic drugstore. This is one of the newer buildings that have been erected since, or moved in since we first started coming here. That is just a horrifying contraption. So we've looked around in a few of the different buildings. We looked at the swap meet, but I haven't really talked about the history of the museum at all. Basically, the origin of the museum dates back to 1969. The Antique Automobile Club of Saskatchewan, which was based in Moose Jaw, raised some funds and purchased 10 acres of land outside the city and erected a museum building to house a number of the antique cars and collectibles. And that was really the genesis of the museum. In that same year, in the fall, the farmer who they had purchased the land from offered to let them harvest his crop of oats, and that's really what started the annual threshing bee tradition, which still takes place to this day. So that's kind of how it started. The bunch of enthusiasts who had some antique automobiles got together and decided to start a museum, and it just kept growing from there. More farm equipment came in, more vehicles came in, that sort of thing, and eventually the Sukanen Ship part of things came into play, and we'll kind of talk about that as we get a bit further down the road. But for now, that's where we're going to leave the story. Inside the hardware store. The number of artifacts at the museum is simply unfathomable. unfathomable how much material is in here. So while today it's housing the hardware displays, the building was originally the Kalmachi School. And in fact, when you look at the inside, you can even see still the inside the door. You can see where there was a vestibule inside the original entrance. And if you look behind the displays along the far wall, you can still see the chalkboards in place. This building always reminds me of my uncle's business, which was Hep's Auto Wreckers in Lethbridge, with just shelves and shelves of random car parts. As a kid, I used to find it one of the most fascinating places to go. So I always loved it when my dad needed something for one of his old vehicles and we had an excuse to go to Hep's. If you're of a certain age, you will remember Radio Shack. This is the genuine Radio Shack. As in, it's a shack full of radios. The audio for that portion of the video will assume be muted by YouTube due to the fact that it was playing commercial radio there on one of the old radios, but you get the idea anyway. Now we get to the next phase of the museum's history, which came in 1977 with the dedication of the Sukanen Ship. And this is quite a story. There's been a number of documentaries produced by the National Film Board and the CBC that talk about Tom Sukanen, or Tom Sukanen, depending on your pronunciation, and his ship in the middle of the prairies. Let's just give you a quick overview. So Tom Sukanen was born in 1878 in Finland and came to America as a 20-year-old and settled in the Minnesota area. And basically he got married, kind of started a family, but by 1911 things weren't going that well with the farming business, so he actually walked to Saskatchewan to meet up with his brother who was farming in the area. So Sukanen had a bit of a history in shipbuilding already. And by 1918, he had decided that he had had enough success with farming that it was time to collect his wife and children from Minnesota. So he walked back to Minnesota to collect them, only to find that his wife had perished. And when he tried to bring the children back to Canada, he was accused of smuggling them out of the country and was forced to leave them in the US. So I'll make the long story as short as possible, but basically, Sukanen in the 1930s set about building a steamship that he was going to use to carry him back to his native Finland. And he constructed it on his farm or on his homestead, and then set about dragging it to the nearest river where he was convinced he would be able to navigate back to Finland. So he was not successful, and he eventually died, but his ship lives on, and it became the focal point of the museum here in 1977, which is when the name of the museum was changed to the Sukanen Ship and Pioneer Village Museum. I know I glossed over a lot of details there, but there are plenty of other documentaries that go into the story in much more depth, so you don't need me to do that for you here. Well, of course, I'm not going to bring you this far and not go in. Sukanen was a bit of a genius, especially mechanically, as evidenced by this hand and foot-powered tricycle that he built. And I mentioned all those other documentaries and specials. Here's a good example of a few. Everything you need for a trip to Finland. And of course, no visit to the museum is complete until we go inside my personal favorite building, the fire collections. Over the course of my visits to the museum here, I have spent countless hours in this recreation fire hall, looking at the exhibits, and especially the pictures down on the stairway coming up of all sorts of historical fires from the local area. And needless to say, with the little bit of hazmat training I did do, my claustrophobia in looking at these suits comes roaring back. Yeah, I was like, well, don't you two just look so relaxed? Yeah. Now, I would be remiss if I didn't take you through the small appliance building, which is one of my favorite buildings as well. Now, I call it the small appliance building. They obviously called it the light and power, but I would probably be more inclined to clean the house if vacuum cleaners still looked like this. And don't forget, we visited the now defunct vacuum cleaner museum on our Route 66 trip. I'll try and remember to put a link or a card here. But so many toasters, irons, electric frying pans.
This is quite modern. This is a quite modern one, like
Yeah.
vacuums,
Yeah.
stoves, and all those like machines over there is quite modern.
Yeah. It's from the 1950s. 1948. So this one was made the year I was born. I remember my...
Well, I think anytime you can end a video with a historic train station in the background, you need to take the opportunity to do so. So we're going to wrap it up here. My battery's just about dead. I mean, we have barely scratched the surface of what the museum has to offer. There are buildings and buildings of trucks and tractors, old farm equipment. There are fields full of old farm equipment that haven't been restored, that are just sitting out there. And like I said, I mean, we could shoot another 2 hours of footage here and still probably not see it all. This is an absolutely incredible museum. We never tire of coming here. I really hope you get a chance to visit it one day, but if not, I hope at least coming along with us and getting to see it through our eyes gives you a taste of what you're missing. So if you're ever by Moose Jaw, Saskatchewan, you've got to come to the Sukanen Ship and Pioneer Village Museum. And yeah, so for now, we're going to wrap it up. This has been a fun series of videos to complete. Tomorrow's not really going to be much of an exploration day. We have to get home and get ready to go to work. So that's going to do it, and we will call that good for now. Thank you for watching.